Well, good evening. Lovely to have you here as usual. This week's episode of Horror Stories Narrated is about Tinder. Please stay safe out there when using these apps, because you never know who could be out there. Without further ado, grab yourself a snack, sit back and relax, and hope that tonight will not be your last. I went on a Tinder date some time ago while I was adjusting to a new city I had moved to. I didn't really know anybody there, so I used some online dating apps to see the dating scene around town. I landed one from a girl who seemed just like an artsy hippie type of girl. We had a few exchanges through the Tinder app and then decided to meet up for a drink. I picked her up at her house and she greeted me at the door and gave me a hug. She said the name of a local bar she wanted to go for us to chat and to get to know each other. I told her I would drive and proceeded to my car. The first red flag I noticed was when I walked to my car and opened the door. She had just followed me to the driver's side and was standing behind me staring. I looked at her blankly for about 15 seconds and asked her if she was going to get in. She said, "Sure, I would love to," and went the long way to the passenger side around the back of the car. Since I had just met the girl, I figured she may have just smoked some weed or something, as I had kind of the vibe she got a bit of a stoner. As the driving to the bar, she talked in a very low voice, almost as if she was trying to whisper. I am not hard of hearing or anything, but I had to ask her to repeat herself several times, just so I could make out the full sentences she was saying. When we got back to the bar, I made sure we got a seat closer to the back away from most people, just so I could have a little quiet in order to hear her. The conversations honestly carried on as normal from this point, and was actually a fun time for the time being. We talked about different things we were interested in. She did bring up she did recreationally use weed and a few other tripping substances, like shrooms and such. I'm not much of a fan of these, but at least it made me relax in the back of my mind to think maybe she was just high off marijuana, and that rationally explains some of the out there behavior. Granted, I had a few drinks at this point, so I was honestly not thinking straight. I asked her if she wanted to go to my place after drinks, and she agreed. When we got to my place, we had a few more drinks, and then she started talking about her jewelry. This is where it gets weird. She told me her jewelry was her big secret and it defined her. When I asked her why it was so important, she said, "I'm actually Anastasia, and I was never killed in Russia. My jewelry is my link to the past." It was hard for me to take that serious at that point, with how much I drank, so I kind of challenged that statement using the little bit I knew about history. At this point, she freaked out and started yelling at the top of her lungs about how I don't respect ancestors and history. Then she got quiet and tiptoed right up to me and grabbed me by the neck. She then brought my face eye to eye with hers while still holding my neck. She says at this point, "I am a shaman and I will curse you. My ancestors have destroyed many people and you do not respect that. You are from oppressive ancestors and they will be punished." Then she put her hand in a whiskey glass and made a cross on my face and kissed my forehead. At this point, I started to sober up a little. I talked her into calming down, telling her I was only joking. Then she slowly started going back to normal. Then she started talking about her cat fetish. She tells me she has a list of people who she tames to act as cats. I am not about judging people on the fetishes, so I listen, and she then tells me all the things she does to them and starts acting like a cat in my living room. If she had not yelled at me earlier on, I might have almost been turned on by it. My red flags in my head were tingling like crazy at this point, so I just listen and try not to set her off. She noticed sage on my kitchen counter and asked me to let her light it and bless the house. I use sage to make my house smell better occasionally. It's kind of a ritual I like to do, but it's mine and mine own, something I take very personally and like to do myself. I tell her no. She freaks out, telling me I am a horrible human being and screaming all over the place. I tell her I can take her home now, and she runs to the door and goes outside. As I get outside, she is screaming at the top of her lungs that I am a horrible person, that I should go die. I tell her she can walk herself home, and I go back to my place and lock the door. She then starts banging on the door hard in about 10 minutes, saying she left her phone in there. I grab her phone off the kitchen counter and open the door to hand it to her. She tries to barge inside and I block her with my forearm. She then acts like she's about to punch me. I just hold my ground and tell her she is not coming in. She screams that she wanted the whiskey bottle and we were drinking from. I told her hell no, because I paid for the damn thing. I slam the door in that point and lock it. I hear her bang on the door for a while. I then hear her footsteps going down the stairs. I waited about an hour and then went walking outside to see if she was still hanging around. I didn't see her, nor did I ever see her again after that. I know this is probably not the scariest encounter ever, but for the next few nights I was creeped out, always walking around the area I live in to make sure she wasn't hanging around. I just came out of a relationship and felt like a bit of casual dating would be fun, so I went on to Tinder. I made it clear to the few people I actually matched with and spoke to that I didn't want anything serious, just a dinner date or a pub night here and there. I matched with a really cute guy, let's call him Pete. He had just moved to my city and also wasn't looking for anything serious. He just wanted to meet up some people and see some local spots. The first night we met at a well-known tapas bar. I chose this place because I had a few friends that were waitresses and bar staff there, so I felt safe meeting a stranger here. He was on time, we had nice chats, really cool guy on first impression. We spoke about work, to which he responded that he's a software developer but he's just started his freelancing career. We spoke about where he stays now that he's moved up here, and he said he's sharing a place with some friends. Rent is quite pricey in this city, so it made sense to me. He asked where I live, and I told him I'm lucky to have my own one-bedroom apartment in quite a nice and popular part of town. Mostly thanks to my parents that helped me save and gave me a portion of the deposit money for my 21st birthday, which I invested and grew until I had enough to put it down a decent deposit. He then offered to drop me off at home, but I said no. I'd prefer to Uber home by myself. He asked if this was because I'm gonna go meet someone else after him, and I laughed because I genuinely thought this was a joke. The next time I saw Pete was about 3 days later. He said he knew it was fast, but he actually couldn't stop thinking about me and wanted to see me again. This time we met at a different restaurant, also one I chose because I went to school with the owner and knew all the staff pretty well. The place is a little bit more pricey, and he got super annoyed with me for ordering as much as I did. I couldn't understand why, as since I insisted on paying for my own stuff both times we met. That night, same story. Let me drop you off at home, please. Again, I said no. While we're in the middle of this conversation, he gets a call. He stepped away, but I could still hear a fair amount. No, I think I'm gonna stay with you again. Yeah, I'm with her. Don't worry about it. Okay, I'll be home soon. So now I think he's chatting to his roommate or maybe his mom, but I don't ask. He comes back to our table. Please, I insist. Bad things happen to women that Uber home this late by themselves. I'd feel better if I dropped you off. Not having the energy to argue, I tell him, fine, and I put my address into his GPS. As soon as he got home, he messages me and tells me he'll be picking me up in the morning to go for a picnic. I reply that I actually have cleaning to do, but again, he insists that he'll see me at 10. Come again at 10 a.m. that next morning. Best believe he's right outside my apartment. I get into his car, and as he leans over to kiss my cheek, I notice that his breath stinks. I'm a little bit grossed out. We have our picnic, and it's quite nice. He tried to kiss me a few times, but I avoided it with everything in me. By about 4 p.m., I told him I really want to go home, and that the park we went to is about an hour and a half drive from my apartment, so I couldn't really Uber back home because it would cost a fortune. He agrees it's time to go, so we get back in his car and we're off. I fell asleep in the car on the drive back, and when I woke up, he asked if we should finish the rest of my bubbly we got for mimosas up at my apartment. I said to him I don't want to, and he just snaps. He raised his voice and said something along the lines of, "What are you hiding from me? Just be honest. Why are you so desperate to keep me out of your apartment?" I was so confused I actually just kept quiet. He dropped me off, but I could still see his car from my apartment for about half an hour before he actually left. About 5 minutes later after he left, he let me know that he's home safe and he's thinking of starting to fall for me. So naturally I'm freaked out, because I made it clear that I didn't want anything serious, and he said he felt the same. I said to him, if that's the case, I think we should take a break from hanging out with each other. About 5 days later, he messages and asks if we can go for dinner again. He found a cool Indian cuisine place he knows I'll love. He should just send me the address. He tells me that he'll pick me up. So 7 p.m. comes, he tells me he's downstairs. And as I go down to meet him, I see he's standing at my gate. I pressed the remote control to open the gate, and he walked inside to meet me. "Show me which one is yours. I'd love to see how you live." Not hi, not how are you. That's his opening line. So now I'm naturally unsettled. I say to him that I'm starving. Could we go for dinner and I'll show him my place at a later stage? At dinner, he gets a call again. This time he didn't step away. "Yeah, I don't know. I can let you know by about 10. He then turns to me. "Am I sleeping by you tonight?" No. I don't know. I have work tomorrow." "Yes, me too." And then back to the caller. "I'll let you know, okay?" "No, you're not. Can you just get your things, please?" "And do what with them?" "Take them to that girl you're seeing. I'm done asking you." Now I'm sitting here in absolute shock and terror. What was going on here? Our food arrives and we barely speak. I say to him, "Why did you ask me if you can sleep over by me? We're not spending time together like that. You know this." He then spins his story about how he just wants to hang out and again see how I live. I then say to him very frankly that I don't like having strangers in my apartment. He gets very touched and the bill arrives. As per usual, I pay myself, and he pays for himself. I say to him I'll get an Uber home, and he says, "What's the use? I already know where you live. Let me drop you off." Right now, I've already decided that this will be the last time I see him. I get into his car and I reach for my jumper that I threw in the back when he fetched me. I noticed a bag in the back of the car, full of clothes and toiletries as well as a pillow. I don't think much of it. I don't personally drive or own a car, but I know my sister always has the most random stuff on the back seat. On the way home, he's dead quiet, when suddenly he says, "Do you know how selfish you are? I've had no issue driving you around, but you don't want me to sleep over by you. I say to him that I've never had an issue with Ubering, and if he's so touched, I also have no issue with paying him what the Ubers would have costed me. I'm over this and I'm not even playing nice anymore. His phone rings again. Your stuff is at the security boom at the gate, Pete. Stay with your girlfriend or stay with your mom. You're fucked for taking advantage of everyone like this. Then Pete says, I don't speak to my mom, you know this. And then hangs up. Now I think this is maybe an ex-girlfriend that he needs to collect things from. Before I've even had a chance to process what happened, he turns to me and starts yelling at me. I have nowhere to go. Are you happy? You spoiled brat, living off mommy and daddy's money, getting driven around by me like I work for you? My whole body got stiff with fear. I don't know if I'm going to cry or throw up. In my head, I'm just planning how I'm going to grab my bag the second he stops and run straight to the cafe under my apartment. If you run through the cafe, you can get to a gate that takes you to the back part of my apartment, and it works with fingerprint access. There wasn't time to still find my keys in my bag, and I didn't want the main gate I normally use to open wide enough for him to get in while I go in. He stops at my apartment, and as I planned, I jump out, run into the cafe, run out the back, through the little gate, up to the second floor, and hammered on my neighbor's door. I went inside and told her and her husband everything that happened and asked if they would mind calling the cafe to explain why I ran through. I blocked Pete, and I haven't seen him since. I'm still not sure what his case was. From what I gathered, he was basically homeless, and I think he wanted to get into my apartment to maybe sleep over there for a while. I'm not sure if the girl that kept calling him was also a Tinder date that let her into his apartment and he just never left. All I know is that he scared the living daylights out of me, and I would never, ever want to see him again. So I downloaded Tinder when I was 18. And being single in a big city, I ended up going on a lot of fun dates. One guy really caught my attention because, well, he was really attractive. We chat a bit, and I felt pretty into him, so I decided we could meet for coffee. He was sweet, charming, and we had a great conversation about school, art, and music. We found out we were both musicians, and the date was going so well that I agreed to walk the few blocks back to his house so he could play some music for me. I was new to online dating, and I'm still fairly naive, so I followed him into his weird converted garage bedroom and sat down on the couch while he pulled out his keyboard. He played for a while, and I started getting a little antsy. He was super into the music and kind of getting aggressive. He was slamming keys down and making these weird noises, so I shot up out of my seat and told him I should get going soon. He went back to normal. His tone changed and his posture became less hunchbacked. So when he apologized for getting carried away, I agreed to sit back down on the couch so we could talk more. He came and sat down next to me, and we went back to our earlier conversation. He seemed back to normal and nice, so when he asked if he could kiss me, I agreed. He leaned in and toward me, and when I closed my eyes waiting, I wanted but didn't feel his lips. So I opened my eyes a peek and saw him staring at me. I threw my head back, surprised, but he had snaked his hand back toward my hair and interwoven his fingers so I couldn't move. He then inhaled deeply and told me, "You smell like you're Jewish. I can tell because you smell like my aunt's house." I was totally freaked out at this point, partly because, yes, I am Jewish, and tried to wiggle away from him frantically, stating that I had to go. He then jumped on top of me, and to my horror started sobbing, yelling that he's so sorry he made me uncomfortable. His body weight was completely preventing me from moving, so I forced myself to rub his back. I told him that I wasn't uncomfortable at all, and that he was really sweet. He made me promise over and over again that I'd see him again before finally getting up off of me. I moved to the door and tried calmly to tell him that I really needed to go. He was blocking my way, and all I could think of was I needed him to let me leave. I couldn't fight it off. He told me I needed to kiss him before I could leave, and I quickly pecked him on the lips. He smiled at me, and I was glad that he didn't expect more. "Call me, please. I think that went well," he said, as he opened up the garage door and I scurried out. I called my mom and started crying as soon as I was far enough away. She called me a cab home, and I blocked him from every way we had contacted each other. I saw him once after that on campus, and that was enough for me. I met a guy on Tinder, and we really started to hit it off. We'd been chatting for a few weeks and even discovered that we had a few mutual friends. I was pretty intoxicated one night and feeling social and decided to call an Uber for his place. Once I got there, we ended up talking outside for a while and ended up vibing even better in person. I opened up to him about my health problems, and he opened up to me about his older sister who had passed away from a similar condition to mine. I was curious about his sister, but I definitely didn't want to pry. We walked into his house and it smelled like 1,000 dead rats were rotting under the floorboard. I was still pretty drunk, so I tried to forgive it because, hey, sometimes animals die under a house or in the walls. I started to look around and the whole house looks like a cluttered storage unit. He takes me to his room, which seemingly normal, and we hook up. I ended up falling asleep there and woke up around 10 a.m. to the stench of death. I opened my eyes, feeling very sober, and started to look around the room. I noticed that only girls' clothes were hung in his closet. I start to assume I've possibly been cheated with. Then I see a giant black binder on his nightstand. When he woke up, I decided to jokingly ask him what's in that giant binder. Turns out it was every single episode of Golden Girls printed out. He said he read it at work and that it's the only show he'll ever watch. Okay, I asked him what he did for work, and he dodged the question. I sat up and looked at the pillow I'd been cozily sleeping on. It had no pillowcase and was covered in what looked to be old blood. It looked like the blood had been coughed into it. I started putting the unpleasant pieces together. I asked as sensitively as I could, "Hey, was this your sister's room?" He says, "Yeah, and this is her bed. I haven't changed or washed anything. It just makes me feel better to be in her bed. This is actually where I held her when she died, and you remind me so much of her. I really, really like you." And then casually tried to hook up with me again, like he didn't just drop unsettling news. I felt immensely sorry for him, but he needed to get out of there. I made some excuse and left. I decided to not entirely ghost him because of how bad I felt for him. He was clearly dealing with some really dark stuff. We kept in contact for a few weeks until I went on my Find My Friends app and noticed he had clearly taken my phone while I was asleep that night and shared my location with himself. I called him and went off. This was not my first rodeo with a stalker type, and I was not dealing with it. He told me he couldn't believe I thought he would do that, and I'm being a really terrible person dumping him. I blocked him. After he said that, combined with his tendency to hold on to things, it really made me wonder what that smell actually was. Let's hope not, and though, I hope he gets help. This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I've never had much luck with women, and I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck on there either until like the third month of using it, when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which was odd because bots almost never message more than once. We'd been talking for like a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant as she lived nearly 8 hours from me by car. But I had to admit I really did like her quite a bit, and I had been thinking about asking her if I could come see her for a while now. At this point, I had no reason to doubt she was who she said she was. We had video chatted every other week and called most days. I just assumed I got really lucky. Things did get a little weird on their way though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was and making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she sent me a slew of annoyed texts. Admittedly, I had chalked this all up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. I had a hard time finding the house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads. Still midday when I came onto an old-looking house. A window on the second floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned, just worse for wear. I took out my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of my car to go knock on the door, I noticed someone was looking at me from one of the second floor windows. I found it a little creepy, but figured it was just her father or something. She answered with a smile and even gave me a kiss, which surprised, and I followed her inside. We sat down on her couch and started talking about our plans when I asked her about her dad. "You didn't tell me your dad was here. Was that going to be a surprise?" Katie then looked confused and told me her dad wasn't here. I still thought she was keeping up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, that I had seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said that we had to get out of here now. We both ran to our cars, and when I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad wasn't there and that she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window. He was looking at us from outside the window again. I got a better look of him, and he seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after we saw him. The police took half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told me and Katie that, while they didn't find anyone, they did find that the back door was hanging open. After the cops left Katie, they asked me to stay the night because she looked scared to be in her house alone. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch as Katie's bed was in the room next to the one the man had been in. Katie had also brought the shotgun that her father had given her but never used. I told her it was fine, the man's gone, but she insisted, saying she'd feel safer if we had it out. I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. From the kitchen, I had heard the sound of a doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared, I was just pissed. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy had been in the house before and was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad we had locked the door. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie and told her what happened and called the police again. When they arrived, they did a sweep of the woods and found no one yet again. They told Katie and me that it'd probably be a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. We said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at her friend's house and I was going home. I left a little after Katie did. I was on the phone with my brother telling him about what happened. My headlights were on and I was talking. Something caught my eye. That man was standing at the corner of the house just watching me. I gunned it out of there and didn't even bother calling the police again. But I did text Katie and she said she was going to call them again. I don't think Katie had ever went back into that house alone. This was 3 years ago, and I started college down the country. I was 18 and on Tinder. I never actually met anyone off of it, but I would just swipe through guys just to be nosy. I was swiping right on some, and about an hour after, I got a message off this guy, who according to his account was about 20 kilometers away. We made some small talk. It was awkward and I stopped replying. A day later, I got a friend request off him on Facebook. Mind you, I have a common enough name so it wouldn't have took ages for him to have found me. We have no mutual friends and my Tinder photos is not on my Facebook page. The only thing I had on it was the university I was attending, so maybe that was how he found me, but I don't know. Then I quickly got a follow request on Instagram and he somehow found my Snapchat username. I don't have it on my social media and it's a variation of my full name with extra added in vowels and an underscore. I was freaking out at this point. I messaged him asking how he found out my full name and he just replied with, "I think we have a connection. I really want to get to know you better." I unmatched him, deleted my Tinder and blocked the accounts he tried to add me on all social media. After that, it was quiet for a few months. I was staying in digs and was knuckling down as I had a lot of assignments from the get-go. This was towards the end of November. I had no assignments due for 2 weeks, so I decided to go out with some friends. One of my friends stayed in student accommodation and the other was commuting, so she was staying with the other friend. I decided to walk back to my digs as my landlady would probably freak out if I wasn't home that morning, and I really wish I got a taxi instead. My walk back was about 15 minutes from the local nightclub we were at. It was about 3 a.m. at this point. I was at the front door of the house opening up. The door was annoying as it had 2 different locks and I had to pull the handle towards myself to help open. It's also tough when you're tipsy and trying not to wake up the family you're staying with. Anyway, as I finally unlock the door, a dark car pulls into the housing estate I'm staying in. It's quite big and has a big green area in the middle for children and people to play with their dogs. The car comes towards me, so I quickly get inside to lock the door. The car pulls into the driveway of the house I'm staying in and just sits there with the full headlights on. I'm there shaking and too afraid to move from crouch below the door, as there's frosted glass about halfway up. As I get the courage to go upstairs to look out my bedroom window to see who it is, the car pulls out of the driveway and speeds away. A few days later, I get a new friend request off the creepy Tinder guy and a new Facebook profile, as there was no photos on this account, just the same name. Blocked. It was enough that it caused me to transfer universities the following year. Thankfully, I haven't heard of anything since. I don't know if it was just bad timing or if it was that creep on Tinder that sat in the driveway, but it was petrifying. If you take anything from this, be careful who you let in on social media or dating apps and what information you have up. So this just happened today. Against my better judgment at the beginning of the month, I got a Tinder. I matched with a few guys. One of them is James. We ended up texting each other and he seemed pretty chill and pretty into me. He's a decent looking guy and we seemed to click. He had apparently been in a relatively abusive relationship with a woman and he was looking to start over. According to him, she had hit him with a frying pan and pepper sprayed him once. He kept going on about how crazy she was. We went out to the movies this past Friday, and I had a great time. We ended up talking for a few hours and we hit it off pretty well. I asked about the ex because I was a bit curious as to why he'd stay with someone like that. He didn't say anything positive about her, just that she was crazy, had mental illnesses, and didn't take her meds, that kind of stuff. She had tried to baby trap him, but she had a miscarriage. He expressed relief that she didn't end up with the kid. He said he had felt obligated to her. Again, I get that. In all, I had a good time. This morning rolls around and he tells me that he had hooked up with his ex last night and that he was going to try and work things out with her. Mildly insulting that I lost out to an abusive chick, but whatever. I tell him it's cool. He then a few hours later texted me that she was still crazy and he thought she was changing but she wasn't. Blah blah. He kept asking if he could see me. He wasn't being very pushy about wanting to see me today. He begged for 5 minutes of my time so he could explain to me. I politely told him that I don't want to be involved with someone who was so clearly hung up on his ex. This is where it got nuts. He admitted he still was, but that he wanted to see me today so I could meet her and she could determine if I was better for him than she was. And that she wanted him to be happy because he and I had a connection. I flipped after that, told him that the fact that he needed his ex to determine who was right for him was absolutely nuts and that is not what love is, and I wanted no part in it. His ex started texting me after that, and it was non-stop insults and incoherent stuff that made no sense. She also dropped the bomb that she was his wife. I told her to leave me alone and block the number. I went on Tinder to message him where I called him a piece of crap and if he was intelligent he should leave her and never message me again. He started to harass me, saying that I was miserable because they had a beautiful love together and all this crazy stuff. He then went on to say, "My wife knows where you work. I hope she doesn't do anything rash." And I told him if that's a threat, I would gladly go to the police. He then said that she's been to jail before, she's not afraid, and that she loves him so much she'd mess anyone up and risk jail for him. That she'd kill my friends if they tried to protect me. That she's armed and dangerous. I told him goodbye, reported him, and deleted my Tinder account. I did go to the police tonight, but since it wasn't a direct threat, they can't do much. The cop thinks that James was more or less full of crap and just trying to scare me, since some people love getting off on that stuff. He said I did the right thing by blocking him and reporting him, and said I should just keep my eyes open and alert the people at my job. The scary thing is, James seemed completely normal, but he lied about being married, how he felt towards his wife, and he flipped like a switch. His excuse for not being upfront about being married was that they were going to get a divorce. He seemed so docile and unassuming, and the hatred and aggressive attitude was insane. I have to honestly wonder what would have happened if I had gone to talk for 5 minutes. I'm kind of concerned since they do know where I work, but if either of them try anything, then the cops can actually nail them. What a weekend.